Hello everyone, we're talking about connective tissue today. So by the end of this video, you should be able to identify and distinguish between the types of connective tissue, and there's quite a few. And then also I'm going to talk about the functions of connective tissue. So connective tissue is a lot more than the name implies. It doesn't just connect parts together. What it does is it protects, it also binds things or anchors things in place, and it provides transport, right? Because we've got fluid connective tissue, which is blood, and that blood plasma carries nutrients, electrolytes, etc. So it does do a lot more than the name implies. The name makes it sound very simplistic, but it does a variety of activities that are important for our body. So let's dive into it further. Connective tissue has a lot of key unique features, and all you have to do is look at the extracellular matrix of connective tissue and it tells you everything you need to know. It sort of has this mosaic group of so many substances and cells, and it just depends on where it's located, what it's for, and its functionality as to what's in the extracellular matrix. But there are three common characteristics that are found in connective tissue. First, obviously, is going to be cells, and then we also have something called ground substance, and this is going to depend on where the cell is located as to how much it has. It also has protein fibers, and these are going to be crisscrossed to provide extra strength. Now, the amount structure of each component correlates to the function of the tissue. So if it's bone, it's going to have more rigid ground substance, right, as opposed to another area. Also, there are specialized cells that are in connective tissue, like phagocytic cells. So you could see that the extracellular matrix really gives you a lot of information about connective tissue. Now, in looking at the types of connective tissue, we know that there are several types in our body because, as I said, the extracellular matrix can be very varied, so it depends on what type of connective tissue you're looking at. And this can get a bit confusing because we've got categories and then subcategories within that. So, bear with me, we'll go through all of this. But connective tissue proper is going to be the first category, and I just love that name. I just find it funny that it's the proper connective tissue. And this has two subcategories, and the first one's going to be areolar, adipose, and reticular. And then the other subcategories, your dense connective tissue, and this is going to be dense regular, dense irregular, and then elastic. So the second category we have is supportive connective tissue, and this is going to be more like cartilage type, right? You've got your hyaline cartilage, fibrocartilage, and elastic, but it's also going to include bone naturally. And then we've got fluid connective tissue. This is the one people often forget. This is going to be your blood and lymphatic system, and it has more to do with transportation. So now let's look at connective tissue proper. Now, remember the extracellular matrix is the key component, right? It's going to vary depending on what type of tissue we're looking at. So connective tissue proper has several elements in its extracellular matrix. It has water, it has glycosaminoglycans, proteoglycans, and glycoproteins. And it has this property called thixotrophy. I can't say it. Thixotropy. Anyway, basically what that means, it can go from a gel to a liquid-like consistency. So it's very, very interesting. And then it also has several components. It has reticular fibers, and these are thin proteins that go in these multiple sort of directions, and they hold everything together, and they resist force. And then we've got elastic fibers that contain the protein elastin, and these are going to be branchy and wavy, and this offers resiliency, right? Allowing it to sort of stretch and return to its natural position. And then of course collagen fibers are going to be in there too. These are going to be straight strands of protein, and sometimes they're wound together like rope to offer that tensile strength and flexibility that we see in connective tissue. And these are definitely going to be more abundant in tissue that requires more strength and force, like ligaments or tendons, right? But we're also going to find different types of cells in there, in the extracellular matrix, like adipose tissue, phagocytes, for example, etc., etc. Now that we've talked about connective tissue proper, let's get a visual on it. So this is sort of how it looks. It's got some reticular fibers that sort of look like a web. And then it's got adipocytes, which are basically your fat cells. And this is going to be filled with oil in most of its internal space of the cell. And it's pretty easy to recognize because it's these big sort of goblets of fat. And then we've got mesenchymal cells. Now these are your stem cells. Basically, these will proliferate into other fibroblasts. And then we've got elastic fibers, right? And these are just going to be sort of strewn in there. And then we've got collagen fibers, and these are going to have a little thicker appearance, and they're going to be somewhat crisscrossed to provide more tensile strength, right? And then we also have the fibroblasts, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more extensively. So fibroblasts, what they are, they will vary depending on the tissue's location and function. So fibroblasts are cells that produce or secrete proteins that make up fibers in the extracellular matrix, and there's specialized types of connective tissue have specific names for their fibroblasts. For example, in bone, they're going to be called osteoblasts. In cartilage, they're called chondroblasts. So those are some examples of how it's going to look a little different. So, sorry, that was fibroblasts. I forgot to click on that. And then we've got macrophages. And these basically are going to respond to injury and infection and are therefore very important to have in connective tissue proper extracellular matrix. And there you have it. That's sort of a visual depiction of what's in connective tissue proper. Let's have a chat now about loose connective tissue. Now, you're going to find this tissue between many of your organs, and it has several properties, right? It does help with shock absorption. It binds tissues together, but it also allows water, salts, and nutrients to diffuse through adjacent or embedded cells and tissues. There are three types that we're going to discuss. The first one is adipose tissue, and this is quite easy to recognize in your histology slides because there's very little extracellular matrix. What you see are these big globs of white-looking cells. White adipose tissue is the most abundant. However, it can appear yellow sometimes, and that's because of carotene and other related pigments from plant food. Now, white fat is the one responsible for lipid storage and really serves as insulation from cold temperatures, but also mechanical injuries. So it has a very cushioning sort of property. Now, it can be found in areas like especially your kidneys in the back to protect them, back of your eye, for example. But there's also something called brown adipose tissue, which is very common in infants, right? That's, when they talk about a baby being, having these rolls, they have a lot of brown adipose tissue. And the reason is that brown adipose tissue plays a big role in metabolism, and it is very thermogenic. So it's actually a protective quality for an infant. And being thermogenic means that as it breaks down fat, it releases metabolic heat, right? So you don't have to rely just on ATP. This is a nice alternative. Also, brown adipose tissue is still present in adults. It's just very little. You'll find it in the neck and clavicular, can't say that word, regions of the body. All right, now let's look at areolar tissue. And areolar tissue shows little specialization. It basically has all the cell types, and it has fibers, but they're just distributed very sort of randomly and haphazardly. Like, I think of it like as a Pollock painting. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's really just very random and haphazard, right? And it somewhat looks like this web-like fashion. And what it does, it fills spaces between muscle fibers, it surrounds blood or lymph vessels, and it supports organs in the abdominal cavity, basically. And the other thing it does, it underlies most epithelial cells and represents like the connective tissue component of epithelial membranes. Remember, we talked about apical and basal, that sort of thing. Anyway, the next group is going to be reticular, and reticular comes from the Latin term reticulus, which basically means a little net. So it looks like this net that has been sort of thrown, and this is a very supportive, like mesh-like framework, and it's for soft organs like the lymphatic tissue, the spleen, or the liver. And what it does is it produces reticular fibers that form a network so that other things can attach to them. So it sort of does some anchoring and binding, I would say. All right, so those are the three types of loose connective tissue. Let's move on to dense connective tissue. Now, dense connective tissue is the opposite of loose, right? It's this very tightly woven rope. And I always think of a rope when I think of dense connective tissue. It contains more collagen fibers than loose connective tissue, and it makes it very resistant to sort of stretching, right? And loose connective tissue still has somewhat of a fluid quality, whereas dense does not, categorically at least. So within this category of dense regular connective tissue, so right, we've got dense, then we've got regular connective tissue, and this I align to the perfectly aligned rope fibers, because all the fibers are sort of parallel, and when they're parallel, they give it this immense strength or incredible strength along the direction of those fibers. This is going to be your tendons that connect muscles to bones, and ligaments that connect bones to each other. However, I do want to mention that in ligaments we do have a little variation. There is some crisscrossing of fibers that are loosely sort of braided in a rope format, because ligaments have a little bit more flexibility than tendons do. So that would be your regular. Now within dense regular, we've got dense regular elastic tissue. So you've probably figured that out. You're just adding some elastin fibers there alongside the collagen, which allows it to be stretchier, and it can return to its original shape. So what I think of is dense regular tissue is going to be like your rope. Dense regular elastic tissue is going to be like a bungee cord, right? You can stretch it, but then it goes back and it's still very strong. So this is actually going to be found in your vocal cords or ligaments between our vertebrae, because we still need that support, but we need it to be somewhat flexible. Okay, so we went over dense, then we did dense regular, then we talked about dense regular elastic. Now we're going to talk about dense irregular connective tissue. This is what it says. It's not going to have those regular fibers. What it's going to be, it's going to have all these irregular patterns, and they're going to be woven somewhat like a fabric. because the fibers are all in different directions. But because they're in different directions, what happens is it gives us strength in multiple directions than just one, right? Dense regular connective tissue gives you strength, but only in one direction. This is sort of all over the place. So this crisscross pattern or layered arrangement makes it ideal for where? Where do you think this is going to be? Your skin. Because the skin can withstand stresses from all directions. Now, just like a dense regular has an option of adding elastin, so does dense irregular. So let's talk about dense irregular elastic tissue. Now, what this does, it combines a multi-directional strength with elasticity, right? So think of it like lycra, that stretchy sort of fabric. It's still fabric, it's strong, but it's got this stretchy component. And where do you think you're going to find this in the body? Think about in your body, where do you need to be able to stretch and still have strength and not sort of fall apart, but also come back and recoil. Expand and recoil, that's your clue. Hopefully you figured it out. It's going to be the arteries, right? The walls of our arteries need to have that expand and recoil, and they are going to be made of dense, irregular, elastic tissue. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, I'm just going to show you a video of a visual representation of dense regular and irregular. Now, I do think this is a great activity for you to do if you're not, and don't want to draw. This is a tracing activity. Just trace it, because the actual process of tracing or drawing and coloring is going to help you with that kinesthetic learning piece and help you hopefully recognize some of these aspects in histology slides. So you can see the difference here in how things are arranged, right? Dense regular is a very sort of uniform, just like the name suggests. It's dense, it's compact, but it's very regular. And then irregular is more haphazard overall. All right, moving on to supportive connective tissue, we're going to talk about cartilage. Now, cartilage and bone, I guess. So the distinctive appearance of cartilage is due to a polysaccharide called chondroitin sulfates. And what they do is they bind to ground substance proteins to form something else called proteoglycans. And we'll have other videos that will go into depth here, but basically what you need to know is that all this helps to make the matrix of cartilage look very different than bone. And embedded within this cartilage matrix are something called chondrocytes or cartilage cells. And cartilaginous tissue is avascular. So just remember that. That's very important to remember. There are no blood vessels that go through there. So all nutrients actually have to go through this matrix to reach the chondrocytes. So what does that mean? That means when you have an injury that involves your cartilage, like, shoulder injury or any sort of bone-to-bone injury, the cartilage area is going to take a little longer to heal, just because there is no direct supply of nutrients. We have to sort of go through this process of diffusion or whatever through the matrix to reach the chondrocytes. So that's really important. Now, there are 3 types of cartilage tissues. First, we've got hyaline cartilage. Let's talk about that first. Now, that is the most common type of cartilage in the body, and it consists of short and dispersed collagen fibers that contain a lot of proteoglycans, right? The surface of the hyaline cartilage, you probably recall from any, or even if you've eaten a chicken wing, and it's got that cartilage, you can see how smooth it is. Now, hyaline cartilage is strong, but it also has some flexibility, right? And it's going to be found in the rib cage, your nose, and it also covers the apexes of bones, especially where they meet movable joints. So the other thing to remember about hyaline cartilage, it's actually the template for embryonic skeleton before bone formation. So that plate of hyaline cartilage at the ends of our bones actually allows continued growth until adulthood. All right, let's chat now about fibrocartilage. Now, this is tough because it has these like thick bundles of collagen dispersed through its extracellular matrix, right? It's very thick, and you can see that in the slide. It looks awfully dense because it's got these bands of collagen. This is going to be found where you need a lot of support and cushion. So that would be your knee, like the meniscus of the knee. Also intervertebral discs, right? We need a lot of cushioning there. So those are example of fibrocartilage. Then we've got elastic cartilage, and this contains elastic fibers as well as collagen and proteoglycans that we talked about. The tissue gives rigid support, but it also gives elasticity, right? Think about where is it that you have support, but it's bendable. Think about that. And I bet you can figure it out. It's actually your ear, right? Your ear, you can bend it in all sorts of directions, but then it sort of recoils back to its original shape. So the external ear contains elastic cartilage. That's really easy to remember. So let's go back to cartilage. We've got hyaline cartilage. And that's going to be in your where? In your nose. It's also going to be at the end of your bones, right? It's also going to be in your rib cage. Then we've got fibrocartilage, and this is going to be in your knee joint and your intervertebral discs. And then elastic is going to be in your ear because it gives you that elasticity. Okay, next, moving on to more supportive connective tissue, we've got bone. Now, bone is the hardest connective tissue there is, and it's got this rigid, very rigid extracellular matrix. Remember I told you about ground substance could be liquid or can be solid? Well, bone has very solid extracellular matrix because it mainly contains collagen fibers which are embedded in a mineralized ground substance. So it's not just liquid or solid, there's actually a mineralized component to this, and it contains something called hydroxyapatite, which is a form of calcium phosphate. It's very hard. So both these components of the matrix, the collagen and the calcium phosphate or hydroxyapatite, provide bone with very unusual properties of being rigid and hard. So without collagen, I mean, you need both of them, because without collagen, bone would be too brittle and shatter. And without this hypoxyapatite mineral crystals, bones would be too flexible and not provide the support needed. Now, the bones that the cells that are in bones are actually called osteocytes, similar to chondrocytes. They're also located in a similar region, actually the lacunae. But the bone, unlike cartilage, has a lot of vascularization. So comparatively, it takes a relatively short time to recover from injuries of the bone versus the cartilage. Now, there are two types of bone here. We've got your regular compact bone, which is the gray slide that you see, and it has a very distinct look, so it's pretty easy to identify in histology slides. However, we also have something called cancellous bone, which looks like a sponge, or it's often called spongy bone. And if you look at this under the microscope, it contains these empty spaces between the tuberculae of the bone. And it looks, to me, it reminds me of a honeycomb. And it also has properties of that. It's very strong, but not super strong. And it's very light than compact bone, right? And this is going to be found in the interior of some of our bones, especially in the long end of bones. So those are all your supportive connective tissue features right here. We've got cartilage, and then we've got two types of bone. Lastly, let's have a chat about fluid connective tissue. And there are two that we're going to talk about. First one is blood. Blood basically has a lot of form elements in it, right? You've got your erythrocytes, you've got leukocytes, and you've got platelets. Erythrocytes are going to be transporting oxygen and gases. White blood cells are going to be defending the body. Platelets are there for blood clotting, for example. So it has a lot going on. The liquid matrix of blood has a lot of nutrients, salt and waste or whatever, and basically its job is to transport everything through the body, and that's where the connectivity comes in. It connects our whole body, right? And then we've got lymph, that contains liquid matrix and white blood cells, and lymphatic capillaries are extremely permeable. That is their main quality, which basically means it allows for larger molecules and excess fluid from interstitial spaces to enter the lymphatic vessels. Well, why do we need that? Well, this helps to drain blood vessels, and it delivers molecules to the blood that wouldn't otherwise directly enter the bloodstream, right? Because they're probably too big to enter the bloodstream. But the lymphatic system enables it. It's specialized in this way. The lymphatic capillaries transport absorbed fats specifically, for example, away from the intestine and deliver these molecules to the blood. So that's just one example, but basically that's what the lymphatic system does. It takes away extra fluid and certain larger molecules and delivers it to the blood. Now, when you have an injury and maybe you're experiencing some edema, this is where your lymphatic system is not working fast enough, right? And that's where you get that swelling, because you've got this buildup of interstitial fluid. So both blood and lymph are connective tissues. They just, in our mind, we just don't think of them in the traditional manner. All right, I did want to add a mnemonic here for blood because it is a form of connective tissue, and it's important that you know the contents. So the mnemonic is never let monkeys eat bananas, and basically never is for neutrophils, let is for lymphocytes, and monkeys is for monocytes, eat is eosinophils, and bananas is basophils. These are going to be the cells that are in the blood. All right, let's recap and summarize here. So we talked about connective tissue being very important for support, but also for storage, right? Something that we don't always think about. Storage of energy in the form of fat or adipose tissue. And it acts like the body's glue. Collagen is a major component of connective tissue and is the most abundant protein in the human body. It gives our skin its elasticity and strength, and these are the categories that we've already discussed, but we're going to look at this in the form of a mind map, which will sort of bring everything together. Let's go ahead and do that, shall we? All right, here's our mind map. Okay, so we've got connective tissue as the main category, obviously. Then we've got different types of connective tissue. We've got supportive. This is going to be your bone and also cartilage, right? Cartilage has 3 subcategories. We've got hyaline cartilage, fibrous cartilage, and elastic. And I would probably add under here where you find this type of cartilage, right? So we know hyaline, for example, is going to be your nose. Fibrous is going to be your knee. Elastic is going to be your ear, right? So you could even add that in there. And then going back, we've also got connective tissue proper. Now, this is more of a generalized category, which has 2 other categories under it. We've got loose connective tissue. We've got areolar, reticular, and adipose. And then again, you could write the specific functions and properties of each underneath if you wanted to. And then we've got connective tissue proper, which is dense. Remember, we've got regular and irregular, and you could actually add another subcategory here, right? You could put dense regular elastic or dense irregular elastic, and then add some information of where you might find that. Then we've got fluid connective tissue, which was the last category we discussed. And here we've got blood and lymph. And you can see that I've added, histology slides, but you could add whatever you wanted, whatever you're struggling with. I like to have the histology slides on one mind map, because then when I'm looking at and differentiating between histology and lab, for example, I have everything in one spot to sort of compare, right? And then, you can add little ideas of or triggers to remind you of what it looks like. Like hyaline cartilage to me looks like eyes. You know, it's got these like white spots with black parts, so those look like eyes to me. So that's how I remember what hyaline cartilage is. So I mean, I'm sure you can come up with your own ideas, but this is just to give you a generalized view. So that's essentially all we have for today. This was quite extensive, but even though we went through a lot, it's still only the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more in each of these categories that I go over in other videos. Now I'm going to leave you with a riddle with Ollie, and hopefully I'll see you next time.